All right, what's going on, everybody? Good morning. Got some news yesterday. Arum was on a podcast yesterday. I believe the Cyrus XM's At the Fights, Jerry Cooney's podcast with former New York boxing commissioner Randy Gordon, and they were asking him about the step aside money that Eddie Hearn's been talking about so much for Wilder and for Pulev to try to allow this Fury Joshua unification fight to happen. And Eddie Hearn's been talking about this a lot, man. He's been saying that he's been talking to um, Tyson Fury's people, and there's been dialogue going back and forth, and I get that, but Aaron pretty much confirmed what I said all along. Like, where is this money going to come from? Is it going to be enough? Number one, and number two, are these guys going to want to relinquish the shot at the title? Is Wilder going to want to relinquish the shot at getting his title back? And is Pulev, who's never, who's has never held the title? Obviously, that's his dream to become heavyweight champion of the world. Why would he relinquish that right to do so? Number one. And number two, as I said, so how is this going to be possible? Eddie Hearn, I see, it seems like he always does, is putting the cart before the horse. Now, it looks as though on paper, if we would have both, if everyone was to predict these fights, it looks as though Fury would be an overwhelming favorite against Wilder based on what we saw in the last fight. And not many people are giving Pulev a chance against Joshua. So I don't know what the rush is for Eddie Hearn to try to, circumvent those fights, because for years when Joshua had those three belts, he has them back again. But originally during his first title run, Eddie Hearn would say, we got to fight these mandatories. We got to fight these mandatories. So he knows full well how the sanctioning bodies work. He knows full well how the business of boxing works, and he knows that these sanctioning bodies are not going to just allow these mandatories to fall by the wayside. Okay? Because they made Joshua fight them before. And why would they just all of a sudden say, okay, yeah, we'll let this fight happen? No problem. So and particularly the IBF. The IBF is a stickler for enforcing their mandatories. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. So to just sit there and think that it's going to be so easy to just come up with the money, number one. And number two, is it going to be enough money for these guys to even want to do it? And then number three, why would these guys step out of line and be pushed back to the end of it when they're already at the front of the line? That makes no sense. Like, how marketable is Wilder without having the heavyweight title? And of course, Pulev, it's his dream. It's his dream. So why would he just say that the hell with it? I'll take the money and run. Because again, if you win the title, if Pulev were to win the title, which I'm sure he believes he can do, he's pretty confident, then the money's going to be there later. The money's going to be there later. So you take the step aside money for either man. If Wilder and Pulev, hypothetically speaking, if there was enough money on the table and they ended up taking the step aside money, would that guarantee them a title shot later or in the future? Why would they pass that up? It makes no sense to me. And obviously it makes no sense to Arum as well. Because Arum wins regardless. Arum wins regardless, because think about this. Arum gets 2 fights. Okay? He gets 2 fights. He gets Wilder Fury, and he gets Pulev Joshua. So if both these guys take the step aside money, then Arum only gets 1 fight. And technically speaking, Arum is going to probably end up getting 3 fights, because he'll get Wilder Fury, he'll get Joshua Pulev, and then he'll get the winner of those fights fighting for a unification fight. Right? Think about it. If Pulev were to beat Joshua, then he would own all the belts. Or even if Joshua were to beat Pulev, then there's a mega fight between him and Fury down the road. So I don't understand Eddie Hearn's strategy here. Like, I don't understand what the rush is, unless he's concerned that maybe there could be another hiccup in the road for Anthony Joshua. And then that mega fight, just like the mega fight with Wilder fell by the wayside, maybe he's concerned that the mega fight with Fury will fall by the wayside if Joshua were to get upset again. So maybe that's in the back of his mind that, hey, we had a hiccup. We had a fork in the road. We had a bump in the road with Ruiz. What if we have a bump in the road with Pulev? Then that fight goes down the tubes, if you think about it. But like I said all along, you would have to get these guys to accept the money, number one. And number two, would it be enough money? And number three, would they be willing to relinquish their shot at the titles? Because the title is a heavyweight title is a very important thing to have in the sport of boxing. Very important thing to have in the sport of boxing. So let's read some of these quotes from the article in Boxing Scene that Bob Arum said on the podcast. He said to talk about paying Wilder or paying Pulev step aside money at this point is ludicrous. I mean, we're not the United States Mint that can print and distribute it, 2 trillion, or, money that's hard to imagine. We can't do that. Who's going to pay the step aside money? I mean, where is it coming from? It's nice to say, hey, pay step aside money. Who the hell is going to pay it, right? So, let's look forward to Fury Wilder fight and a Joshua Pulev fight. So that's exactly what what Bob Arum said. Makes sense to me. Again, like, allegedly, and this is something that Eddie Hearn had floated, that if the fight between Fury and Joshua were to be in Saudi Arabia, then Saudi Arabia could possibly come up with the money to pay Wilder and Pulev to step aside. But why would they do that? Why would they put so much money up? We already know there's going to be challenges ahead generating revenue for the sport of boxing because there's no live gate. So that's one revenue stream that's going to be gone. But here's the thing. Wilder does have a rematch clause. Okay, he has enforced that, and he has the right to fight Fury next. And if he says, you know what, I want my title back, I don't care if I have to take a pay cut because there's going to be no live audience, then I'll be willing to take a pay cut. And then if Fury decides he doesn't want to take a pay cut, well, he signed a contract. He signed a contract to fight Wilder next. There was no guarantee, to my knowledge, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure if Bob Arum has information on this, if I were to call him later and probably try to ask him this, which I'm kind of inclined to do. I'm considering calling Bob Arum up and discuss this with him possibly, because I think a good question to ask Bob Arum would be, even though both guys would probably take a hit financially in the third fight, as opposed to the second fight, they'll be taking a pay cut for the third fight. But if Wilder was just so adamant about getting his title back and he didn't care about the pay cut, then how could you stop the fight from happening? I know Bob Arum had suggested that both guys take interim bouts in between, and then hopefully at some point next year they could fight when possibly live gates or live audiences, I should say, would be available in boxing again. Fans would be allowed to go to events live and purchase tickets. That sounds like a good idea in theory, but would Wilder go along with that? Wilder has to agree to that. And I'm not so sure he would, because according to his people and Shelley Finkel, they're adamant about fighting Fury next, and they don't want an interim bout. They don't seem to care about it, any of that stuff. And obviously Bob Arum would care about that stuff because he's a promoter and he's going to try to maximize the revenue. He's a businessman as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this thing plays out. But I don't understand Eddie Hearn talking so much about the step aside, when Joshua was in the position of having his rematch and exercising his rematch clause. There was no talk of a step aside there. There was no talk of a step aside there. And everyone, he had no problem, obviously, doing the rematch with Ruiz. So I don't understand why he can't understand Wilder's situation. Like, any champion's going to want to get the title back after they lose it. Most likely, especially if they have a rematch clause. Generally, when they, most people that have a rematch clause, they tend to exercise it. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, champions who lose their titles who have rematch clauses, they exercise it and they want to get their title back. So, yeah, I think I will call Bob Ralph and just talk to him. It's probably about 6:30 over there right now in Vegas. Maybe I'll call him later and see what he says. I'm sure he's got plenty of time to talk about boxing. So I'd love to get his take on this. It seems like a good idea. But I mean, they're planning on opening up in June, and he is concerned about paying fighters for the high-profile fights if he can't generate the revenue through ticket sales. But when are they going to allow? When is the United States or one of the states? How is this going to work moving forward? Obviously, UFC had an event last week without a live audience. It seemed to go off without a hitch. And they had the testing in place, and they identified, I believe it was one or two, I think it was one fighter, either one or two fighter. It was one or two fighters that I think tested positive, and they were identified. I guess they're testing everyone every day. So, yeah, that's correct, Ralph. They're saying they're doing shows in June, but without a live audience. That's what Bob Arum is saying he's going to do. Yeah. So we'll see. Let's get some quotes about that too. Bob Arum also was talking about detailing details for the medical process for upcoming Top Rank shows. He said Bob Arum says Top Rank's up. He also says his upcoming schedule will have high caliber fights. Let's read it. Let's read a couple of these. Some quotes from a couple of these articles. I guess he was being interviewed by Kugan Cassius. Shout out to Kugan Cassius, IFL TV. And he says that he hopes to start making announcements on upcoming schedules starting next week. He said it'll be all fighters who have either appeared on the main event or in the semi-main event on past televised on ESPN or streamed on ESPN Plus. So Arum says they'll all be high caliber shows. They will not be the big fights like Lomachenko Lopez, for the reason that Lomachenko is still stuck in the Ukraine, and we don't know when we're going to get him over here to the United States, but we're working on all that. I think we'll be able to, as this progresses, I know that Frank and Eddie will be using the Brits that are under contract to us, like Josh Taylor, Frampton, Mick Conlon, putting them on cards, also probably without audiences. He said, so Herring will probably fight someone else to defend his 130-pound championship. In other words, it's not ideal, but we're going to be doing the best we possibly can. So some of these guys that can't travel over here, like Lomachenko and Frampton, and because they're trying to put together a Frampton Herring fight. So obviously Frampton won't be able to travel. Lomachenko won't be able to travel. And I think of Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor can't travel. Mick Conlon won't be able to travel. So because of the travel bans with Europe because of the COVID virus, it's going to be some challenges ahead with that. And also let's talk about what he said here. about the medical procedure moving forward to what procedure he's going to have in place to get these shows up and running moving forward here with the new normal that we're all experiencing right now with this virus. So he said long before the first fight of the night for the UFC 249 hit, Bob Arum already had a clear vision on how things would go or hope to go for Top Rank's first post-pandemic boxing show. And he talked about UFC 249, gave his opinion on it. He said as a first step, it wasn't bad. Arum told Boxing Scene of the measures taken for last Saturday's ESPN pay-per-view event. He said, it wouldn't be fair to criticize with it being the first one out the box, nor am I here to criticize them as they do more shows, especially once they come back to Las Vegas. They would adhere to the policies and it will be a lot better. It would look more like ours. He said, so, okay. All right. So he was talking about how all the participants were tested, and I guess UFC has some more shows. They're going to be working on some more shows at their Apex Center in Las Vegas. And I think they got a show coming up on March 23rd. It's going to be on ESPN Plus. So UFC seems to be going forward with ESPN. And then he talks about here, he says, we knew all along what UFC's plans were for those shows. Ours is better. And there was never going to determine, well, it's kind of a typo here. This guy's got to do a better job of editing if we're Boxing Scene. Because ours is better, and theirs was never going to determine how we handle our shows. Theirs will be as good as ours once they start doing shows in Las Vegas. The Nevada officials have come up with a very good plan, and we've been working with the Corona Task Force in the state, along with Nevada State Athletic Commission, Bob Bennett, and MGM Grand Hotels, which will make a facility available for us. So what happened on Saturday with I guess the fighter's last name, Souza's COVID positive test being learned the day before the fight night will never happen at our shows. It will be detected before they can even get in the facility. That has to be done and will be done. So we're talking about 4 fights to start out. And the fewer fights you have, the better you can control things. So I guess what Arum is saying moving forward, he's going to have a smaller card, so there'll be less fighters on the card. So that seems to be beneficial. That'll help. And also, he doesn't want what happened at UFC 249, where a fighter tests positive the day before the event. I guess he wants to be ahead of the game. Maybe he'll start testing earlier than the UFC people did. And one thing I guess he has that the UFC didn't have at the time was he actually has a coronavirus task force. So I'm assuming some medical doctors and medical advisors will be on that board. So he seems to be a little bit ahead of UFC in terms of that stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out moving forward. I think this is a step in the right direction. I think UFC, as Arum said, under the circumstances, did do a good job with their show. I mean, it's from what I'm hearing, again, these are just rumors. I'm hearing that the show did 700,000 pay-per-view buys, and that's good for Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje, because obviously they're not going to do what a Conor McGregor and a Khabib would do, but those are good numbers. No disrespect to Tony Ferguson, he's a pretty decent name. He's a big name, but he's no Khabib and he's no Conor. So for them to do 700,000 under these conditions in these circumstances, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. But I already know that some of the boxers like Teofimo Lopez has already come out and said, I don't want to fight in empty arenas. Okay, he's complained about that. And then Terrence Crawford's already come out and said, well, I expect to get the same amount of money I got fighting in an empty arena than I did fighting in a live arena. And I know that he has a guaranteed minimum. Allegedly, That's around in the ballpark of 3 million. That's what I hear. I can't confirm it with 100% certainty, but that's what I hear. And he was also saying, Terrence Crawford, that is, was saying that he gets percentage of the gate. So he was getting more than his minimum, in some of his fights. But Arum doesn't see how that's going to be possible moving forward if there's not going to be a live audience there. That's because that's one revenue stream that's going to be shut down. I mean, that's understandable. But Crawford's already complained. Teofimo Lopez has already complained that he doesn't want to fight without a crowd, and Crawford wants the same money he got with the crowd, then it's going to be without a crowd. I don't know. And Arum said, if he offers people fights and they turn him down, then he's just going to go to the next guy. So it's going to be interesting to see. These guys are talking now, but they got bills, they got families, so they're going to have to fight sooner or later. And one thing they can say is, if I'm going to be getting less money, then obviously the expectations are going to be that I'm not going to fight the best guys. I'm not. Why would I put myself out there and put myself at a high risk for a low reward? We already know how the sport of boxing works. We already know the mentality of fighters. We already know these guys got managers, they got lawyers, they got advisors, and I'm sure that they're going to be advised accordingly based on the current situation. And Arum knows that too. He even said, it's been quoted as saying that we're not going to see those big fights that we anticipated. And a lot of that has to do with the travel, like I mentioned earlier, but also these guys are going to be a little bit more selective with their opponents. If the pay is going to go down, then obviously the level of the opponent is going to go down along with it. So these are all things that have to be taken into consideration. These are all things that have to be taken into consideration. And I think it's very valid points made by all points. But I'm gonna try and give Bob a call later today, and hopefully I can get something up. And maybe I'll have some questions, because I have some questions moving forward that I'd love to ask them about how this is going to look, moving forward with the shows. And credit to him, he seems to be the first guy out of the blocks that's actually has a plan and that's trying to get the ball rolling with getting boxing started up again in the United States. We haven't heard much from Oscar. We haven't heard much from anyone else. I know Eddie's been talking, but as far as the United States goes, we haven't heard from anyone else besides Bob Arum. So he seems to be ahead of the curve here. He seems to be a little bit proactive here, and that's a good thing. If he's already been talking to medical people and he already has the ball rolling here, then that's a good sign. So at least we're going to see some type of boxing in June, according to Bob, and that's a bright light, man. That's a bright spot looking forward, man. That's something to look forward to if you're a boxing fan. We're finally going to be able to watch boxing back again in June, man. I'm excited. I'm excited to hear that. So, yeah. So as far as the step aside money goes, I mean, I think Hearn should put this talk to rest. I just don't think it's going to happen. Bob Brown doesn't think it's going to happen. None of these fighters, I know Wilder, according to his team, they don't want it. Pulev is definitely not going to take it, according to what he's been saying in the press. Why even talk about it? This is the frustration sometimes that I have with Eddie Hearn. He just floats stuff out there just to stir the pot. But it's like, I think next year at some point, a Fury Joshua fight's going to happen. Why not just wait and have it under optimum conditions? When hopefully, I would assume, I don't want to be too optimistic here, but I would assume next year at some point, whether it be in the middle, toward the end, I think our new normal will be closer to our old normal. And I think that boxing will be resemble a lot like it was before this pandemic started. So why not just be smart about it, let everything play out, let everything unfold, take baby steps moving forward. Let's not be overly ambitious here. And let's let the fight happen when it should happen, when it's optimal. That makes the most sense to me. Trying to get everyone excited for something that's just not going to happen. That's why people get angry. They get pissed off with him. That's why they get angry. That's why he gets criticized so much, because it just makes no sense to float things out there that aren't going to happen. So yeah, all I can say is I'm looking forward to next month. I can't wait. I'm very happy that Bob Arum has a plan moving forward. Hopefully, these other promoters will have a plan as well. But I think Arum wanted to take his time a little bit more than the UFC did, because I believe he thinks he could do it better than how they did it. And again, it's sometimes it's good to let someone go first. That way you can learn from the other person's mistakes. So that UFC show went off pretty much without a hitch, but I'm sure even, as Dana White admitted, it could have gone a little better than it did. But all things considered, I think it went off pretty well. I think it was a success. And I'm hoping and I'm being optimistic that these boxing shows will go off without a hitch as well. All right, guys, that's all I got for now. Maybe I'll, like I said, talk to Bob later, and hopefully we can get some more information on what his plans are moving forward. Have a great day, guys. Peace out and stay safe. Talk to y'all soon.